Welcome to Healing the Spirit, a space where we awaken our creativity, deepen our connections, and remember who we are through the lens of astrology, archetypes, and art making. I'm your host, Jonathan Coe. Hello everyone, welcome to Healing the Spirit and welcome to this episode. I am delighted to share this electric, inspiring, and deeply moving conversation with Kelsey Rose Tortorice. Kelsey is an astrologer, a human design practitioner. I find Kelsey's work so deeply nourishing, and I find Kelsey to be a very sincere and thought-provoking human being. Back in 2021, I received my first human design reading from Kelsey, and it served as this initiation into the weird, the wonderful world of human design. And I haven't found the bottom of the human design rabbit hole that I'm currently falling in. And so it feels super fitting. It feels very synchronistic and honestly, super appropriate that Kelsey is my guest for the first conversation on the podcast that revolves around human design. If you know human design and you've been around human design for a while, you may know that the whole point of human design is that it's not a purely mental concept, right? It's not a purely mental system. At the heart, human design is really an invitation to experiment with your own life, with your own reality, with your own body and how your body communicates with you, and also to experiment with what happens when you let yourself be guided by your body. The idea of the experimentation, in other words, allowing yourself to interact with reality and with life as it is rather than as you think it should be, is really important in human design because that's really where the work happens. And so this conversation is really me and Kelsey sharing our observations, sharing our experiences and learnings that we accrued from experimenting with human design in our daily reality and through the filter of our own design. We talked about some of the big concepts that you probably hear a lot about if you are around human design people, including the Maia, including the idea of no choice, which is something that Ra'uruhu, the person through whom human design was channeled, spoke a lot about. We spoke about Kelsey's experience of being a manifestor, how that looked like and felt like for them. And we also discussed the projection field, something that both of us are deeply fascinated by, constantly learning as fifth line people. What I always love about being in Kelsey's presence and experiencing their teachings is that Kelsey has this incredible ability to not only explain complex concepts in ways that are understandable and digestible, but also to motivate and inspire you to want to learn more, even when you don't fully understand all of the terminologies, right? Each time Kelsey speaks feels like this potent energetic transmission to me. And it's really encoded in the way that they embody who they are. And in my own experience, it's only gotten stronger over the years. And so wherever you might be on your human design journey, whether you are quite trained in it, or maybe you have only really learned about human design through Instagram memes, which I believe that most of us, that's how we are exposed to human design nowadays, probably as an entry point. No matter where you are on that journey, I really believe that there's something here for you from Kelsey's transmissions about the idea of differentiation. So, to introduce Kelsey, here is their bio. Kelsey is a post capitalist astrologer, teacher, human design experimenter, and community initiator. They are a student and teacher of the Maia, seeking to understand and universalize the mechanics of reality within the context of individuality, cosmos, and consciousness as a whole. Their work facilitates upheaval, disrupting homogenized programming and reorienting people to their differentiated truth and inherent wholeness. Before we start, I also want to share that Kelsey and her collaborator, Allison Forsyth, have an upcoming offering called Heretic Haven. It begins this coming Wednesday on April 10th, 2024. All of the links to learn about it will be in the show notes below, obviously, but I want to read you a blurb from the website of Heretic Haven. Heretic Haven is a careful and immersive exploration of the fifth line experience, from projection, villainization, and victimization to acceptance, responsibility, and empowerment. It is an experience designed to lift the veil on the projection field. Heretic Haven fuses source material and the lived experiences of two experimenters and teachers, along with experiential, self-reflective activities and a community of those who truly understand, to bring you on a holistic, immersive, in-depth journey through the fifth line experience. All right, here is my conversation with Kelsey. Welcome, Kelsey. Thank you for being here on the podcast.
Thanks, Jonathan.
I'm so excited to have you. I feel like this is really a long time coming. It's been a while since I connected with you, and I just really admire your work and the ways that you bring all these different lenses together to contextualize the cosmos. I love the title that you give yourself, which is cosmic contextualizer. Is that what you call yourself?
Yeah, always kind of playing with different phrasing and titles, which is probably because of what I'm about to say. Being ruled by Jupiter in Gemini, I always like to have fun with the language. But there was something that hit me a few years ago when I was really just moving through a deep phase of attunement to chart rulers and just really in this mode of what does it mean for me to be an agent of Jupiter as a Sag rising. And that was kind of the crystal that came through from that phase of my astrological exploration, that as an agent of Jupiter, I'm here for the context, the big picture context.
Right. I really feel that coming from your work. And you're actually my first introduction to human design. I had my first human design reading with you, and then I took your human design for the astrologically minded. And yeah, I think what I've always noticed about the way you orient towards your work is you have this really uncanny ability to synthesize the different lenses and to allow whatever comes through to come through, but in a way that's very grounded. Like, I feel like you have such a strong grasp on each of the different systems that you've been devoted to, and that really shows, I think, in the quality of your transmissions. So I really admire that about you, and I want to hear all about it today in our conversation.
That's so kind of you. Thank you. The context that comes to mind for me around that recognition is my second line. I don't know if you want to just jump into context without defining it.
Totally. Let's do it.
Cool.
And you can define it too if you want.
Sure. Yeah. We'll take a little swirly approach with some definitions and some leaving some things up to mystery. We have in common the fifth line, which is this messenger, this universalizer, it is a contextualizer and a synthesizer in a way, but then What we don't have in common is our other profile line, you being a 3-5, me being a 5-2. It's like
Mm-hmm.
the way that we come to that universalization, to that messaging, to the heresy as is part of our fifth line archetype. It's like resourced from something different.
Mm-hmm.
One of the ways I think about the profile lines is like 4, 5, and 6. The upper trigram are they're transpersonal, so they're like getting a message across in some way, versus 1, 2,
Mm-hmm.
and 3 are personal, so you're in your own process with it.
Yeah.
And the 3 is like you have such a solid foundation of what you're talking about and sharing from a fifth line perspective, because as a third line, you're universalizing what you've been through and the hard-earned truths that you've come across, the things you've bumped into and that you know for sure because you've tested it.
Mm.
And as a second line, the second line is the step before that. It's much more like in theory. It's a
Mm.
harmonic of the 5, so that like I see my ability to synthesize as the 5 and the 2 kind of working together. But I'm not synthesizing things that I learned from books necessarily, like a
Mm.
first line would, and I'm not
Mm-hmm.
synthesizing things that I know for certain from my lived experience, at least not in the way that it works for you, that level of
Mm-hmm.
like certainty that you get to as a third line. So
Mm.
it's just really, I guess all of this to say, it's really nice to hear that feedback, because the second line, one of the words that goes with it is the
Mm-hmm.
naturalness. So it is very natural for me to be able to synthesize what has come to seem true for
Mm.
me through my exploration of all these different systems. But I can't tell you, as a second line, like we can't tell you how we got there, really. It's just this like thing that is natural
Mm-hmm.
to us. And so there's like the association with the second line of the gift, but it lacks the solidity that both the first line and the third line, I think, can
Mm.
access, because the first line knows because they learned it and they
Mm.
like deeply investigated it. The third line knows because they went out and tried it. And the second line knows, but in this like ethereal way. So it's just often it's like I'm speaking from the depths of my soul, but it's like a big question mark a lot of the time whether it's able to land for people, because I don't
Mm-hmm.
really know where it's coming from. It doesn't
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't always feel solid and concrete.
Yeah, it's making me think about a couple things. One is the idea of gnosis, right? And just being able to kind of know things without maybe having a lot of grounding or having experienced it through like a trial error process. And the other thing that's coming up for me as well is I remember, I think this was maybe in our first human design reading where you said something along the lines of, how certain people just kind of know their body graph from being attuned to their own experience. And I remember you saying that, and I just felt this deep, full body resonance of like, yeah, I actually know exactly what you're talking about because this just explains my experience. And I think there's something about that transmission that feels very second line to me, that part of your gift is also in pointing out to people things that maybe they already knew, but is just getting the language or the framework to validate for themselves. Mm-hmm.
Wow. I love that. That's like you're speaking to something that I found in human design, but I had not made the conscious connection to this version of it. Like
Mm-hmm.
the larger thing that I'm finding that you're speaking to is the way that one of the coolest things about human design is it shows us in such clear, absolute terms how our energy imprints and affects and influences and conditions one another,
Mm-hmm.
like just how we viscerally plug in to one another energetically and amplify each other's frequency. But I had never really thought about that in terms of profile, and how,
Mm-hmm.
as like a second line body, there's this unconscious thing happening,
Mm-hmm.
perhaps in my presence for people, which is it brings out the naturalness in them and amplifies their own nature
Yeah.
in a way, right? That helps people tune into their own naturalness. That's
Yeah.
really cool.
Yeah. And I think even thinking about that transmission, right, or kind of that awakening through presence, um, even though we have our like primary profile, like a 3-5 for me, there are also other planets that are where I have the second gate defined, right? Or
Hmm.
yeah, activated. So I think it's like, yeah, I think of it as in your presence, like some of those second line.
Harmonics. Yeah, yeah.
Harmonics. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, we resonate to Ra, the guy who downloaded, channeled, founded, whatever you want to call it, human design. He talks about fractal a
Hmm.
lot,
Hmm.
and like how everybody that you encounter is on your fractal, like maybe
Mm.
right there on your fractal or maybe way off in the distance, but everyone you encounter and meet in your life is like on your fractal. And I haven't studied this enough or marinated in it enough to be able to like universalize it articulately, but I really just see it, and I see astrology this way too, the natal chart this way, is it's like this picture of fragments of geometry. And so fractal is then people on your fractal, at least my natural orientation to it is it's like, it's just somebody who has at least one same slice of
Mm.
this fragmented sacred geometry of whole. And so
Mhm.
we're always resonating with people in these different ways. Like you and I resonate in a strong way as fifth lines, right?
Mhm.
And then we resonate in a maybe more subtle way where I just looked at your design, your four second line activations
Mhm.
resonate with my second line, right?
Yeah.
So there's
Yeah.
just all these little pieces, pockets of resonance. And I think I've thought about that with astrology a lot too, specific to aspects, like kind of
Mm.
looking at uh aspects in synastry as like these
Mhm.
places where my energy is able to like literally resonate with yours,
Yeah.
whether it's a
Yeah.
crunchy one like a square or a smooth one like a trine or a sextile. It's like our essence is able to catch each other right there
Mhm.
because of the
Mhm.
aspect. So yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. I want to take us back to um, the start, however you want to define the start. But I'm really curious to hear about how you got to this point where you explore these different systems, what led you here. I think we've also talked about casually how you also had a music background. So I'm really curious to also hear how that's informing what you're doing in the
Hmm.
moment. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, it's so fun. I always think of, sorry, mini tangent. I always think about having a defined G, which is another thing you and I have in common, and like
Hmm.
that ability to kind of look back and see a sort of linear trajectory of how I got to where I
Mm.
am now,
Hmm.
and how I think my having a defined G just makes me really enjoy thinking of my own life that way and makes me enjoy hearing other people's sense of their linear trajectories. But it's been a while since I've tried to put this together. So let's see what comes out. Yeah, so as a kid, the biggest like thing in my life, the biggest part of my identity with my defined G was being in choir,
Mm.
and not just school choir, but when I was 8, I joined this like I grew up outside of Cleveland, Ohio, and I joined this like renowned youth choir called the Singing Angels, super cheesy. And it's
I
like
love it.
8 to 18-year-olds, and there was like a training chorus and a performing chorus. But overall, it was like hundreds of kids. Like I think performing chorus was usually between 200 and 300, and then training chorus was like 100 younger kids. And it was my whole life. Like
Mm.
all of my best friends from my childhood were singing angels people,
Mm.
kids from all over the city and the suburbs. And like depending on the year, the time of year, we would rehearse for 4 hours on Saturdays, or 4 hours on Saturdays, 4 hours on Sundays, 2 hours on Tuesdays, 2 hours on Thursdays. So it was like my entire life, my entire identity, my entire social scene was being a part of this huge community, this huge choir. I traveled internationally with the group. It was like everything. Um, and I see so many echoes of that in my work now. One of them
Mm.
very much being just frequency, right? Like I remember having a moment, um, maybe like 8 or 9 years ago, where I realized that music was the first form of meditation and mindfulness that I had ever tapped into. It was
Mhm.
like now it's so obvious, music is absolutely meditation and mindfulness.
Mhm.
But at a certain point in my journey from music to where I am now with these cosmic languages that I work with primarily, one of the steps along the way was a big focus on yoga, traditional yoga,
Mm.
not just asana, but the entire system,
Mhm.
including meditation. And at one point, that felt like such a foreign thing to me. Like it felt so exciting and different and um, kind of ninth housey, expansive and outside of my wheelhouse to play in spirituality and meditation. And then one day I was just like, this is literally what I've been doing since I
Yeah.
was really younger than 8, with piano
Yeah.
lessons. But it being such a huge part of my life, like as a kid, up to 4 times a week, I would be sitting in a chair reading music,
Mm.
harmonizing with people around me, and like in that frequency, in that mindfulness frequency. So that's one big way I see it. I also think like community is a really big part of my life, and
Mm.
through my deconditioning and my human design experiment and getting to know myself through more deeply and more accurately, both through astrology and human design, I see that my relationship with community is actually really different than what
Mm.
I thought, or I guess like the
Mm.
way that community operates in my life and the way that I show up in community is really different than what I thought.
Mm.
But being in that choir for 10 years from 8 to 18 and that community being such a huge part of my life and really like identifying with this larger vision that I was a part of for so long, like
Mhm.
that has left such an imprint on who I am as well.
Yeah.
And community is again, my relationship to community has undergone a lot of upheaval,
Hmm.
and
Do
it's
you want to talk about it a little bit?
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's clarifying in a lot of ways, but it's like still always there. Like the emphasis on it
Mm.
is always present. I
Hmm.
mean, yeah, we're in eclipse season right now. We're in the middle of 2 eclipses, and um Libra for me is my whole sign 11th,
Hmm.
South Node Libra eclipses. So I'm kind of
Hmm.
in this like what feels like this sort of final stage of clearing out my old paradigm, my old relationship to community in these 11th house themes.
Mm.
But yeah, actually, I'm feeling more drawn to this moment at connecting the line from
Mm.
Singing Angels to now, but we should
Yeah.
talk about community. But
Go for it.
um,
Yeah.
yeah, so I went to school for music education, moved to Chicago, got my degree there, and then I taught full-time high school choir and music theory and keyboard skills at 2 different schools for about 8 years, I think, total. And got really burnt out, got really disenfranchised with the system of education, realized how much the workforce was not conducive to my needs. And throughout that whole period of like becoming disenfranchised with education, and honestly also just becoming less interested in teaching in that capacity, took me a while
Mm.
to look back and see that that was part of what was happening. I wanted to blame it on the institution and on like society, which
Mm.
certainly is a part of it. But eventually I got to a place where I saw that, like, even probably in the most well-oiled machine of education, being a classroom teacher would probably not work for me.
Mm.
But, anyways, in that long process of divesting from this dream and this vision of my future I had for so long, I was also developing a yoga practice and training in yoga. And I think the next modality I dipped my toes into was Reiki,
Mm.
which is still all my modalities are kind of, Gemini, like your Gemini moon. All my modalities like inform one another and they're always there, but I tend to have like one or two that are more at the forefront. And so yoga
Hmm.
is just a huge automatic background part of my life right now that informs everything I do, but it's not at the forefront.
Mm.
Reiki, kind of similarly, in an even more subtle way. I've studied the Akashic records. And then I think astrology was what came in after Reiki. And that was just life changing. Like
Hmm.
astrology was like where yoga taught me presence in like in my body and energy. Astrology gave me this intellectual framework to place all these radical experiences of divestment and deconditioning and context and shattering
Mm.
of the mind that I'd been
Hmm.
experiencing. So
Hmm.
yeah, astrology kind of provided like a different intellectual framework to the one I'd been brought up on. And then some, I think it was around the Saturn square of my like astrology awareness that human design came in. And I'm like 4 or 5 years into that now. So yeah, I'll leave it at that in terms of my path to where I am now. I have no idea what I do now because traditional, like I don't know what to call it besides like cosmic contextualizer, because all traditional forms of like, or I shouldn't even say traditional, but all standard sort of templated forms of how we
Mm,
work with these systems like don't work
mhm.
for me. Like I try them and they don't work. I try them,
Yeah.
I get bored with them. I try them, I get tired with them. So I'm just in this like long-term leap of faith mode now
Mm.
that I think at one point I thought would be temporary, and now I realize it's just my life.
It's
Where
very Jupiterian too.
is
Hmm.
it? Yeah, leap of
I
faith.
feel like
Yeah.
that's very satirizing to me.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And maybe Jupiter in detriment a little bit as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
Where yeah, it just kind of feels like every year or every half a year or quarter or something, I'm kind of reevaluating what do I feel like doing with these
Mm,
modalities and with how I want to talk about them and offer them, and then just sort of crossing my fingers and hoping that the way I feel like doing it will meet people and somehow offer me reciprocity. So
hmm.
that's today's answer for how I got to where I am now.
I love that. It's making me think also about I think I saw you post something on Threads a while back about being an experimentor, which I just really love that term. I saw it and I felt this like ticklish feeling. I also heard a lot of second line themes in your answer too, because to me, that piece around creating your own path with all of the different modalities that you've learned and um, having what I'm also hearing is you creating your own ways of using the different modalities, right? Because ultimately, these different modalities are really instruments, right? You can think of them in musical terms as instruments, and you're ultimately creating your own music, you know? And what I see that I really appreciate from your vast array of offerings is you seem to have this balance between um, such a beautiful skill around sharing and explaining complex systems in ways that make sense to the brain, but also then offering these experiences where people get to really be with their own lived experience for some time and experiment with how the system is translated into their life. I think that piece around the translation of from the system into one's own lived experience is always such a juicy piece because it's never like a one-to-one translation, right? It's always a little bit, um, yeah, like there's kind of a non-linear quality to that. Hmm.
Hmm. Yeah, I've been thinking about this concept so much lately. And it, for me, it feels really connected to, maybe correlated is a better word, to my own deconditioning because,
Mm,
I entered adult life by getting an education degree and teaching in a very like systemized, strategic way, like curriculum building and skill-based learning, right, with music. And as I've been like trying to write my own music per your metaphor and like find the ways that are most intuitive and organic for me to be a teacher, because I am a teacher, but I have like all this baggage about what teaching is.
mm, hmm.
And I'm finding that like maybe this may be a little bit like my South Node in Virgo in the 10th a bit, and my North Node in Pisces in the fourth. Again, being like having a Mercury ruled South Node and a Jupiter ruled North Node specifically,
Mm,
that I used to put a lot of value on my ability to like teach the skill and teach the language. And it's just been over the last few years. I think I had first had a kind of an epiphany around this in my ninth house year, which kind of makes sense.
mm,
Leo, ninth house solar year for me a few years ago now. I've just entered my 12th house year.
hmm.
Crazy. Um, and I remember having this like kind of soft, slow epiphany that's been unfolding since, that like, yes, I'm a teacher and yes, I teach the languages, but the languages are a vehicle for
Mm,
something behind them, because the languages for me have never just been about the language. They've been about everything these languages show me, and the
mm,
way that these languages attune me to truth in a way that I never personally could grasp or see before I had systems like astrology and human design.
yeah.
And I don't think that's the case for everyone. I think about this a lot with my nodes, actually, how like being more familiar with Virgo as a Virgo South node, and also being ruled by Jupiter in Gemini, just another flavor of that. Like I needed to see the parts of the system in order to really tap into the wholeness of it. So
Mm-hmm.
I've been on this like wild North Node Pisces journey for so much of my life, but for me, it had to get filtered through parts, through
Mm-hmm.
compartmentalization. So, like, the
Mm-hmm.
zodiac has been one of the most profound teachers of my life. Like, simply the geometry of the zodiac, showing me the parts and the relationship of all of those parts so that I
Mm-hmm.
could digest and compartmentalize those parts in order to attune to the frequency of Pisces, that
Yeah.
wholeness, that oneness. And so, yeah, for me, like, a lot of my journey the last Saturn square or so has been like learning to come into a more humble and receptive relationship with this idea of being a teacher and seeing all the ways that my programming and my conditioning made me value certain components of teaching or certain results around teaching, and sort of divesting from this idea that it's about being good at teaching the parts and honoring that, like, yeah, I have that skill set, but also the point is the frequency, the point is the transmission, the point is the ability to help people remember these
Mm-hmm.
truths that they ultimately know,
Mm-hmm.
and find those energetically and attune to them and come back to them. And like having imposter syndrome around that, because for so long I was like, I know how to build a curriculum, I know how to write a course, I know how to like scaffold the lessons and teach the parts, that
Mm-hmm.
like acknowledging that there's something more powerful behind that and that I have the capacity to bring that through has taken me a long time to own, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. This is reminding me of my own experience with being a Virgo rising Pisces sun, where I noticed that, yeah, I can get really sophisticated and detail oriented and careful about the creation of the pathway that I want to take people through. But ultimately, what people get out of it is almost, it's always surprising me. And it always kind of leads back to some of the same stuff, which is, yeah, the transmission, as you pointed out. Yeah, there's a certain way in which um, I think that the colonial education background that we've all kind of come out of made us think that it's the curriculum that helps people get to a certain point, when actually it's really the act of being present, with the material, being present with one another, being present with the teacher. And yeah, it's interesting. I feel that push and pull within myself too around um, sharing the details in ways that are grounded and that can help people then um, create a practice that feels rooted in something, that they don't feel shaky in their foundations, but at the same time too, realizing that that's not really the point of it, you know?
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It brings up to like the whole choice, no choice binary is how I think of
Mm-hmm.
it, but
Mm-hmm.
astrologers think about it more as fate and free will,
Yeah.
and like how there's just so many factors that have to line up for the quote correct or impactful or healthy like student teacher dynamic to come into play.
Yeah.
Like the student has to be ready, the teacher has to be um like ripe, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Skilled and attuned.
Yeah, and also just like momentarily ripe. I don't know if this is maybe
Mm-hmm.
something that speaks a bit more to my own uniqueness too, like being a disseminating moon,
Mm-hmm.
natally, being a manifestor. Like I have the 1/8 as well, the channel of inspiration. Like
Mm-hmm.
my body has to be literally ripe with inspiration and context in order for something to land. And if I'm just not
Mm-hmm.
in that mode, like if the lesson isn't fresh for me, if it's
Mm-hmm.
feeling boring or stale, or I'm just, I have individual emotional channels in human design or one. So I like move through a lot of like pulses of inspiration, melancholy. So if
Mm-hmm.
if things aren't lined up, then like it doesn't matter how skilled I lay out the curriculum, like it won't come out of me alive. you know?
Mm,
And then the
mm-hmm,
same has to be true for the student. Like they have to be in a place where they're ready to hear the thing. And
mm-hmm,
sometimes it's like, I think I'm teaching this and they're getting this out of it. Like I can
mm,
be on a whole different journey,
mm-hmm.
but they'll get exactly what they need.
Yeah.
So I think where I'm trying to get at is like my own experimentation with choicelessness
Mm,
has also offered me a lot of like grace and widened my capacity for leaps of faith when it comes to this question of like, what is good teaching or how do I want to show up as a
mm-hmm.
teacher or a facilitator? Because I just see how little our mental agendas actually have to do with what ends up coming through.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to hear more about your experience with choicelessness and
Mm,
maybe the journey that you've been on. Um, Something that I experienced for myself beginning to learn human design was I feel like I kind of come out of the astrologer community, which is very can kind of tiptoe around this idea of choicelessness a little bit, right? Especially, I think modern astrology, um, the more psychological side of it, is really oriented towards essentially how you can change your fate, you know? If I have to put it very, very simply. And then coming into human design and getting this experience of learning about the concept of choicelessness and how that's not always a smooth translation. I personally kind of find it very liberating. The first time I
yeah.
heard about it, I was like, ooh, I'm into it, you know? And
Hmm.
I remember talking to a friend who was learning the material around the same time that I was and just noticing like an energetic, like, I don't want to hear about that kind of posture, even though that wasn't exactly the words they were saying. I just was sensing it energetically. So, yeah, I think this is a topic or a concept in human design that can be a little hard to stomach, especially if one grows up in the United States culture in modern
Yeah.
times. Hmm.
It's so complicated, Jonathan. I've been on like so many different trips with this
Mm,
concept of choice, no choice. And
mhm.
it is interesting to hear you reference like directly coming from a sort of modern psychological orientation to astrology and fate and free will into human design. I'm not sure that I've like really observed like reflected on that consecutive shift for myself, but I
Mm,
really relate to what you said where
mhm.
I know I was never like captivated by the fate free will question as it was proposed in astrology, the way that I have been so captivated by the choice, no choice binary
Mm, mhm,
in human design.
mhm.
Um, and it's just, yeah, it's kind of, I'm curious about why that is. It was something like it didn't feel important to me to dig into that much with astrology. I think the way that like fate and free will were kind of framed in astrology, it didn't come up against any assumptions or prior frameworks or beliefs that I'd had before finding astrology.
Yeah.
And I sort of found myself this like astrologer who was trained in more traditional Hellenistic techniques, but resonated a little bit more with the more modern psychological approach and fused them together. Like for me, it just felt very comfortable to kind of sit in the middle of that
Mhm.
pendulum of fate free will.
Yeah.
But then with human design, it's like you see frequency in your design in a way that is so much more concrete and absolute. It's not dissimilar from how we can see our frequency in our natal charts, but there's something just like more grounded, more concrete and absolute. Absolute is a word that Ra uses a lot, and I'm not sure I have a better one to describe the terms of human design and the way that the body graph shows you your frequency. It's just like it's a binary system. Like you have
Mhm.
this definition or you don't. You have this
Mhm.
channel or you don't. So it's a lot less like poetic, I think, than
Mm.
astrology. It's like
Agreed.
this is mechanically what's happening.
Yeah.
And it's like I've talked about this before how human design is absurd. Like had I not already been through like a decade of watching my mind get blown by the fact that astrology is real, watching my mind get blown by the fact that I can like summon energy in my hands via
Mm.
Reiki, because none of these things were things prior than my experimentation with them in my 20s that I could have even entertained based
Mhm.
on my background.
Yeah.
And had I not already like had all these like rugs pulled out from underneath me and all these like just miracles, essentially, Pisces North Node journey, I wouldn't have even have entertained human design. But with human design, it's like it's harder to understand what you're looking at, and it's harder, I think, from a mental level to buy into it. Because at least
Mm.
with astrology, it's like there's physical body. You can see exactly where it's coming from.
Mhm.
Like it's I mean, I know for a lot of people, astrology is absurd, but if you think astrology is absurd, you're going to think human design is like completely
Insane.
unhinged absurd because it is. Like its origin is unhinged. It's absurd. But it's like you don't have to get, or at least for me, and I think this is a lot of people's experiences with it, you don't have to get that deep into the weeds of understanding what it is and how to translate it to see the intense fucking truth of the
Mhm.
mechanics of your aura and your
Mhm.
frequency and your definition in your lived experience.
Yeah.
And so it like, and I think this is part of the nature of the system itself of human design is like, and I think of human design as like a living being sometimes that like
Mhm.
infects you. You know, you kind of like you come into relationship with it and it changes you.
Mhm.
And you don't have to understand it on a mental intellectual level to be impacted by it, which I don't actually think is as true for astrology, or at least in
Mm.
my experience learning it and teaching it. It doesn't feel as true. It feels like with astrology, you really do need to take the time to build your own relationship with all the archetypes and understand what they mean to you and really grapple with all the different building blocks.
Mhm.
Um, Otherwise, you're very much reliant on someone else's translation and the ceiling for how that can influence you and make you feel connected and whole and true and connect you to your subjective truth and yourself and all these beautiful things we get from astrology. Like the ceiling is very low if you don't know the
Mhm.
language for yourself.
Mhm.
And there's something very different about human design where a lot of
Totally.
times you catch the bug and you want to go deep, but you don't have to go deep to like really experience that energetic attunement and experience
Mm.
that shattering.
Mhm.
And so what I was starting to say a minute or so ago is I think it's part of the nature of human design that it sort of forces you to bypass the mental intellectual understanding of it,
Mhm.
because the whole for me like the whole first 2 years maybe, at least the first year, I was like still not understanding where it came from, how it could possibly be real. That was annoying me that I couldn't grasp it on an intellectual level, but at a certain point it stopped mattering
Yeah.
because I it was teaching me how to feel truth in my
Mm.
body, and I would
Mhm.
and teaching me how all that mental chatter about trying to understand it intellectually was a distraction from truth.
Mm.
And so as I was like, sometimes I say slowly, but really also very quickly, attuning to my subjective truth, it was showing me that all that stuff doesn't really matter. And like the intellectual understanding and filling in all those gaps, it comes when it comes,
Mhm.
but it doesn't come according to when your mind thinks you need it. It just comes when it comes. And by the time it comes, it doesn't matter anymore because you've accessed truth in another way that bypasses the realm of mind.
Yeah. I think you're also helping me understand my experience a little bit better because I remember the first time I got a human design reading from you, I had to sit with that reading for a while. Like it felt true right away. And then it was almost like my body was the one dictating to me that I'm ready for going deeper, and then I remember when I took, the Living Your Design course with Human Design Collective, which I know you also work with John and Amy at some point. I felt that course kind of going down my throat super quickly. Like I was like, yes, 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 I got this one. And then I did Rave ABCs. And then afterwards, I was like, I really don't want to take Rave cartography for a while. Like I only just signed up and I was like, oh, this is so fascinating because again, very different from my relationship with astrology, where I think within, the first 6 months of getting serious, quote unquote, about learning astrology, I was suddenly in like 3 different courses, you know? And I was like learning all these traditions all at once. And I also feel like with astrology, there's a way in which my brain needed to kind of understand maybe the whole or the entirety of the system relatively quickly before I can kind of experiment with it from an embodied, more poetic, spirit level experience, right? Whereas with human design, it was almost as if they gave it to you right away. You know, like you know your type, you know your strategy and authority right away. And it's almost like that piece around experimenting with these basic information takes a really long time for you to
Yeah.
even make sense of in your own experience. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Have I told you the metaphor that I think of sometimes about like glue stick glitter art and the body graph for human design?
Mm-mm, I don't think so.
So, okay, we'll see if this comes back to what you're talking about, and then we'll see if we end up coming back to choice, no choice. But when you were a kid, did you ever make art by like drawing a shape with a glue stick on a piece of paper, sprinkling a bunch of glitter all over the paper, and then shaking the paper off, and
Mm-hmm.
the glitter sticks where the glue stick was, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's how I think about the body graph in a
Mm.
lot of ways. The glue is like your definition, so your gates, your channels, your defined centers, and the glitter is everything. It's
Mm-hmm.
conditioning, but it's also just everything in life experience. And the non-glued parts of the paper are your openness. And
Mm.
so when you are attuned to your body graph, when you're starting to experiment with your human design, which you do primarily through strategy and authority. There's so much other stuff to human design, and I think understanding the centers really like is in my experience as a student and experimenter and as a teacher, like I was saying earlier, you don't need to know the whole system, but in my experience, you do need to know the mechanics of the centers and openness
Mm-hmm.
and definition. So, kind of
Mm-hmm.
taking it one layer beyond just type, strategy, and authority, because type, strategy, and authority are all based on center definition and openness. So, understanding
Yes.
that next layer brings a
Mm-hmm.
lot of like depth and context to your experimentation with type and authority. Type and strategy can feel like rules
Mm-hmm.
until you see that they're rooted in this like very real mechanical thing in your system.
Agreed.
And then there tends to be this like buy-in, I think, because you understand the mechanics of it. But anyways,
Mm-hmm.
the moment you're attuned to your aura type, the moment you're just, even if you're not actively like intending to work with your strategy and authority, the moment someone clues you into it or you have that experience of like just starting to be able to grasp what responding means for you as a generator, or for me, my emotional authority as an emotional manifestor, it's like something gets turned on in your system that's like, and it's like now I have the glue stick on
Mm.
the paper, and so now every life experience I have, everything I witness in my life is adhering to, it's building on that glue stick glitter image. So I can
Mm.
no longer experience something
Mm-hmm.
without seeing it through that
Mm-hmm.
lens. And not
Mm-hmm.
only seeing it, because it's not just intellectual, but like energetically feeling and attuning to my experience according to this particular framework. And it's such a somatic experiential framework
Mm.
that the moment you start working with it, and maybe I don't want to over universalize this because I think there are people working with human design in a very disembodied way.
Mm-hmm.
But the moment you start working with human design in an embodied, differentiated, aware way, humble way, you everything you experience coalesces around your definition and
Mm.
your design. And so coming back to like you having to sit with the foundational reading that I offered you for a long time, and then moving really like quickly and excitedly through LYD and Rave ABCs, and then not. It's like when you're interfacing with human design and even just the process of learning it, it's like you don't get to look away from the mechanics that you're learning as you're learning them. So it's everything in life becomes part of your human design, quote training or
Mm.
education, because
Mm-hmm.
it's the whole language, the whole system is designed to help you feel your body and
Mm-hmm.
tap into your unique, subjective, differentiated way of being a carrier of consciousness
Mm.
moving through this Maya. And
Mm-hmm.
so there's not a single thing in your life that you can experience that isn't a part of this process of deconditioning. And so it's like it shows you how, oh, my mind, in my case, like really thinks it needs to understand the body graph or
Mm.
understand the whole system.
Mm-hmm.
Or in your case, like my mind thinks because I took rave ABCs, I have to just go right on to rave cartography. But then you just watch and you get better and better at seeing and discerning the difference between your mental narrative about it and what your body's actually moving you through.
Mm.
Right. And I think this
Mm-hmm.
is a good segue to choice, no choice, maybe, but let me
Mm-hmm.
pause there because that was a lot.
I love that. I love that. I'm wanting you to move into choice, no choice. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, one of my first ways of calibrating to this no choice concept, which let's define it. I don't even know if I really can. Like, how does it first come up? I'm trying to remember how it was first introduced to me. Like, the concept of no choice, I'll just say the way I first understood it was like, when you see that your body is designed to move, your aura, your frequency is designed to move through the world in a certain way, and you
Mm.
start to be better able to make in the moment distinctions between what your mind thinks should be happening and what
Mm.
your body is ultimately facilitating and
Mm-hmm.
moving towards or not moving towards,
Mm-hmm.
choice becomes a really curious thing.
Mm.
Because if you as a generator are either responding or not responding, that's just what's happening. And your mind's always going to have a story about it. But the human design experiment helps you to see those distinctions
Mm.
and basically just helps us to alleviate the resistance that we experience to what's happening anyways. And
Yeah.
we start to see that like our ego mind will has very little to do with what we actually feel somatically moved towards from a strategy perspective, right? So for most people,
Totally.
for generators, like what is my body actually energetically resourcing me to say yes to in any
Mm-hmm.
moment? Usually, especially at the beginning of the experiment, has nothing to fucking do with what you think you're supposed to be doing. And I'm talking about big ways and all the way down to the most minute ways of how I'm using my time and my energy minute to minute. It's a little different and more complicated for manifestors. So
Mm-hmm.
I'll leave it at the generator example. And so, at least for me, my first kind of like confrontation with no choice, which no choice is a phrase that Ra used a lot. And so it's kind of just
Mm.
become this little mantra
Mm-hmm.
within human design, like no choice. And another side phrase that you'll hear a lot of people say in human design as well is like what to do. Like,
Mm.
this is what's happening, what to do. Like, I'm not in charge of it because I
Mm-hmm.
guess maybe this is a good time also to bring up the concept of passenger consciousness,
Mm.
which is
Mm-hmm.
really what no choice is about, right?
Yeah.
Passenger consciousness. I think other spiritual frameworks very much work with it as well. In human design, we call it specifically passenger consciousness. I think Michael Singer calls it witness consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's mindfulness.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the ability to watch the thinking mind. And
Mm-hmm.
in human design, the idea is that the mind is the vehicle, or sorry, the mind is the passenger, the vehicle, the form is the driver.
Mm-hmm.
And we are these conglomerate beings, this combination of our mind, the passenger, and our form, the vehicle. And it's together, those two things. And this is where some human design stuff gets really wacko. Is like we have our personality and our design crystal, and they're held together by
Mm-hmm.
the magnetic monopole and the G center. And those things together move us through time and space. And time and
Mm.
space is the Maya.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately, what matters there, at least at the beginning, is that like we are kind of stuck in this binary system, which is what I call the Maya. We're stuck
Mm-hmm.
in the Maya. No matter how awake and aware we are, we're still here. We're still in the third dimension. The third dimension is built out of duality, polarity, binary. We're always going to have these binary minds. We're always going to be reckoning with this dance of passenger vehicle. But suffering in a very big way comes from the thinking mind overemphasizing its role, thinking that it's in control, and resisting what the body's going to do anyways.
Mm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so, no choices, I agree with you, like for the most part, feels very liberating, or I think it has the potential to feel very liberating because it gives you permission to listen to your mind even befriend it, honor what
Mm.
it's saying as the passenger. Sometimes I like to think of the mind as the narrator, but then acknowledge that what's actually happening is something different. And what's
Mhm.
actually happening is that your form, your vehicle, which is the carrier of your life and
Mm.
your life force, is moving you in a direction other than maybe what you are conditioned to think is right and what your mind is perpetuating its
Yeah.
story about rightness and wrongness about. And so it just creates, like, the concept of no choice, the concept of passenger consciousness just creates this permission basically just to experiment with, like, allowing what's happening to be happening without trying to diagnose it as something that's wrong. And I guess
Mhm.
the question and the experimentation of it is like, and I don't always feel really clear on this, but the question is like, does it actually mean I don't have choice? Because can't I choose to resist and choose not to listen to my body? And I think to an extent, yes, but it's like, I remember in my LYD class when we were grappling with choice, no choice one day, I remember saying something like, well, the only choice we have is surrender, I
Mm.
guess, right? And
Mhm.
like, what kind of choice is that? Is that even choice if the only
Mm.
choice is to surrender?
Mhm.
Um, yeah.
It's very
But
eclipsed too. I want to share with you a couple examples in my own. This is my third line coming online right now, inspired by everything you're sharing about my own experimentation that's been really liberating for me. One is really befriending my undefined throat and realizing the mechanics of actually what's happening because I'm surrounded by people with throat definition. Like my whole family has throat definition. My partner of 10 years plus has throat definition. Someone that I collaborated with deeply had, throat definition. And what I noticed is, um, it was really painful for me before learning about the undefined throat to see what was happening in reality, which was most of the time when I kind of jump out of nowhere and like start saying things that my brain thinks that they should be doing or that we should be doing, that there's no impact whatsoever. Like I try my best and I push and push and their minds are not changed. There's
mhm,
no impact on their body. And these people also happen to have a lot of definition in their chart as well. And I don't, even though I'm a generator. And learning about my undefined throat has helped me actually tune into my own throat to feel into, is this what is being called for in this moment? Because most of the time, us living in civilized, quote unquote, civilized society in 2024, we're not just going to interrupt people and be like, I don't care about what you have to say. Like most people don't go around saying that, but energetically, I can really feel that. And it's so
mm,
clear to me which relationships, which environments, which timing, because it's also very timing sensitive, um, are calling for me to speak up. And experimenting with that without taking it personally and knowing, oh, it's just because I have an undefined
mhm,
throat is
mhm,
actually then becomes so liberating because when I'm in the presence of someone and they don't have that openness to hearing what I have to say, paradoxically, the no choice aspect of my design helps me make a choice, which is, do I
mhm,
want to stay here?
mhm, mhm,
Or do I need to reach out and maybe find a different environment where my voice can land for that
mhm,
particular environment, right? And
mhm.
in a sense, I think the choicelessness of the design gives us a lot of space to play in the Maya, right?
Yeah.
Because I can then, like, for example, in this moment with you, I can feel your openness at certain moments to receiving what I have to say. And that feels like such a gift,
Yeah.
for the undefined throat, right? Mm-hmm.
You know what all this brings up for me is like this moment we're moving through astrologically with the Aries Libra eclipses and the Aries Libra nodes. And you're pulling me back to one of the things that I have found to be the most powerful about human design, which is its relational potential.
Mm.
in helping to facilitate this divestment from blame and
Mm-hmm.
obligation in
Mm-hmm.
relationship. Because if you know, as a generator, like operating from your definition, your channel 515, your sacral to G definition, if you are in this process of becoming attuned to your own choicelessness around what your body has energy for or not, what you're available for or not, your own ability to then permiss yourself to honor that, even though there's so many voices of I should be saying this, or from the place of your undefined throat, one of the like, quote, not self voices of that is like, I should be making impact. I should be getting attention. I want to
Mm-hmm.
be getting attention and I'm not. As
Mm-hmm.
you learn to remember to, might be a better verb, trust your body to guide you through all those shoulds, and trust your body to tell you when to respond and when to take up that space, and trust your body to be able to gauge for you when there's an openness and when there's not. That's helping you to clear a lot of your own internalized shame and blame and obsession
Mm-hmm.
with obligation and shoulds and rights and wrongs. And
Mm-hmm.
as you're moving through that process of like self permission and even self forgiveness in that way, divesting from the binary of right wrong, your capacity to be able to offer that to those you're in relationship with and everyone around you grows so exponentially.
Mm-hmm.
Like as a manifester, it's a different mechanical origin than the sacral yes or no, but there's something similar around manifestors and generators are the two energy types, right? So we have something in common where it's like our body energetically resources us towards that which is for us and does not
Mm-hmm.
energetically resource us towards that which is not for us. And I
Mm-hmm.
think like the timing piece is so important because it's just in this moment.
Mm-hmm.
Like you might
Mm-hmm.
not be available for me for the next 3 weeks. And I might sense that. And I
Mm-hmm.
now know from my own experience that that is not fucking personal.
It's
That's something
not.
John and Amy say a lot, right? It's not
Yeah.
personal, it's mechanics,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like that's
Mm-hmm.
so healing. And I know some people are really put off by that kind of language in
Mm.
human design, like that we're these mechanical machines. And to me, that's just like part of the truth. And it's a liberating part if you can access it open-mindedly. But
Yeah.
none of this is personal. Like my mind thinks that this is what relationships should look like. It thinks that this is what I owe the people that I'm a family member to, that I'm a partner to, that I'm a friend to. But the truth is that my body does not resource me to constantly show up in those ways in any kind of like predictable, homogenized way. My
Mm-hmm.
body resources me to move through the Maia, the playground of the Maia, including all the relational webs within it
Mm.
in a way that is unique to me. And that changes moment to moment. And I can become more and more aware and clear on like the patterns and the consistencies within that. And I do through my experimentation. And that helps me to trust my own process. And that helps me to cultivate a sense of inherent worthiness within that's not so dependent on my perception of how people are um, valuing me in relationship or not, and whether I'm meeting their expectation or not. But ultimately, it shows me that, like, coming back to choicelessness, it shows me that it doesn't matter what I think should be happening or
Mm-hmm.
what anyone else thinks should be happening because there's some divine orchestration of bodies and beings moving through the Maya that is so much more complex than my mind will ever be able to comprehend. And it's so
Mm-hmm.
much more beautiful and perfect and magical than my mind could ever comprehend. And so, this idea of no choice, I often get this imagery. Do you know contact improv dancing?
I've heard about it. Mm-hmm.
It's like I've done it before. It's really cool, but I also enjoy watching videos of it. It's like probably won't do it justice, but it's like this intuitive, unplanned dancing that happens, unchoreographed dancing where there's just bodies in space and all of your movement, excuse me, is dictated by when you come into contact with another person, whether it's
Mm-hmm.
like your hands touch or you lean all the way back on them, whatever it is, you just feel the natural force and you
Mm.
let that propel you. And so it's
Mm-hmm.
like this group dance that happens just through responding to the light touches that just begin to organically happen between the different people.
Mm.
And it's
Mm-hmm.
beautiful to watch. And the first time this imagery came up for me as a metaphor for what correct movement through the Maia, according to human design, was when I went to a human design conference in like summer of 2022, maybe. Can't remember. And it was just like all these people. I mean, there was tons of not self and distortion there too, but it was
Mm-hmm.
also like most uh the most plentiful experience I'd had of people honoring no choice and people not taking things personally and honoring what they had energy for and what they didn't, and like just like a
Yeah.
playground to experiment with that. And the whole like weekend long experiment experience to me felt like this like life-sized version
Mm.
of contact improv dancing.
Mm-hmm.
And like I remember feeling myself like, okay, people here know I'm a manifester. um they're not expecting me, and who I'm sure this isn't true, but it like the whole experience gave me permission to experiment with being a manifester, to
Mm-hmm.
experiment with like not investing so much in social norms,
Mm-hmm.
and like allowing myself to have this closed, repelling aura, and like not expecting myself to be actively responding, but honoring like who I wanted to go up to and talk to in that moment and who I didn't, and not feeling
Mm-hmm.
tied to what I thought might be expected of me. And I
Yeah.
think everyone there to some extent was like experiencing a higher level of permission because we knew we were with people in this experiment. And
Mm-hmm.
the whole weekend ended up feeling like this just flow, like this just like exhaling, and we would just bump into each other and trust our bodies for the
Mm.
proper engagement, the
Mm-hmm.
correct plugging in and unplugging. And there was just such a lightness about it. And
Mm.
yeah, I think what you were talking about last just really brought that up for me. And it feels very North Node in Aries, South Node in Libra, like releasing our overemphasis on the consideration of our effect on other
Mm.
people.
Yeah.
That stuff matters. Like Libra is as sacred a place of the zodiac as any other. But with the North Node in Aries, it's like the call is to filter all of the relational web and influence and consideration of others through your innate, in the moment, spontaneous uniqueness and your
Mm-hmm.
innate, in the moment, spontaneous desire and truth, and allowing that to be the filter through which all the relational stuff happens.
Mm-hmm.
And like
Mm-hmm.
like astrology conceptually can point towards that when we study the relationship of Aries to Libra or any polarity. Or a lot of times for me, I like to conceptualize this according to the cardinal signs. And I tend to think of the four cardinal signs and the hard aspects between them as like the crunchiness of interdependence, and how
Mm-hmm.
we need all four of those versions of like responsibility and obligation to
Mm.
arrive to a healthy system of interdependence. So
Yeah.
conceptually, astrology showed me that stuff by showing
Mm-hmm.
me these fragments of truth, and
Mm-hmm.
how they're all sacred in their own right, and how even though they seem like they conflict with one another, they don't, because the
Mm-hmm.
truth is the whole zodiac.
Mm-hmm.
But human design like gave me an actual, I guess I'll say strategy, but it's not a mental strategy
Mm-hmm.
for day to day moving through my life in a way that helps me see more clearly every day how my body helps me navigate that in a way that like allows my uniqueness and my individuality to be the primary filter
Yeah.
of my experience of everything else, including relationship.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'm really curious to hear about what you've learned about being a manifester through your experimentation.
Man,
I know it's a big question.
yeah. Being a manifester is like literally energetically isolating. I'd
Mm.
say that's
Mm-hmm.
like one of the main octaves of my experience. Um, it's going to sound really dramatic,
Mm.
but manifestors are the only type with a closed aura. We're the only type whose energy is not designed to interact with others, except for literally in a one-way orientation when we have the energy to initiate. It's
Mm.
like energy coming out. What makes a manifestor is, and this won't mean anything to people who don't know any of the mechanics, but if you know some of the mechanics, what makes a manifestor is having an undefined sacral, but with a different motor center connected to the throat. So there's
Mm-hmm.
this inconsistent potential for energy to come from within the form and initiate and create impact outside of the form.
Mm-hmm.
Someone I studied with just very briefly before he passed away last year was John Martin. And John Martin, he was a 6'2" splenic projector. He would say manifestors are the only type that can move the Maia because we're literally taking frequency from inside, which we can conceptualize as many different things. I kind of think as the manifestor urge as like feeling personal, but it's actually very collective and sacred. So we feel like we're initiating things for ourselves, and other people might project that those initiations are very self-serving, but being the only type that can create these ripples out in the Maia, like everything we do is a part of this contact improv dance, right? So what's initiated through me is not just for me. It happens through me, but it's for everyone who will be impacted by it.
Yeah.
But like, that's probably one of the biggest lessons that I've gotten from attuning to my manifestor aura is like, and I think, you know, every single type has their existential crisis. You know, like the grass is not greener.
Yeah.
So I have a lot of like depth of understanding and grief and intimacy with the part of the manifestor experience that is the manifestor existential crisis. And I don't mean to imply that it's bigger or more prominent or significant than, you know, the differentiated version of human existentialism as experienced through any other type, but it's the one I know, so I can speak to it.
Yeah.
But it's like it's almost like my experience in this incarnation with this manifestor aura is like I've made this sacrifice to not experience getting choked up, to not experience connection the way that most people do, so that I can like play this surrendered role of the conduit of the manifestor, you know. And there's a real heaviness to that, but one of the ways that I've kind of come around to it is to understand that I just have a body that's designed to connect differently. So like as a manifestor, manifestors and reflectors, total about 10% of the population, our auras are more attuned to transits, to the program, to the cosmos, and more heavily conditioned by that, and less so by interpersonal conditioning. Whereas generators and projectors, collectively, about 90% of the population have auras that are more attuned to interpersonal connection and conditioning than the cosmic ones. And so I just have kind of circled around to understanding that the way that I connect to other beings is through connecting to source or cosmos or whatever, and then being this conduit. And I feel such a deep connection with people when I'm really in the flow of that, you know, when I'm like really initiating from a place of truth. It's like the closed aura is still closed, but there's some other layer of openness that happens because I'm in flow with source. And that means I'm in flow with you. And it might not be hitting me energetically the same way it would generator to generator, projector to projector, generator to projector. But the interaction is happening exactly the way that is most aligned and in flow for me. And so when that's happening, I don't feel cut off. I feel so connected, but it's just I've had to learn to accept the version of connection that looks very different than what is a bit more standard and conventional for a population whose 90% has an aura that's built to plug into and bounce off one another. So it's been this real like journey of surrender to my closedness and honoring that there's a version of connection and love that I get to feel, but it just does not look on the outside or feel on the inside like what other people experience. And it's like, I think a lot of manifestors who have been in it for a while will tell you that like, we don't know what our closed aura is at first because we have never experienced anything else. And so it takes time to grapple with and grasp and actually see and collect evidence of the fact that we are not energetically connecting to people the way that other people are. And there's a whole like process, you know, that you move through in regards to that.
Yeah. Wow. My undefined emotional center really felt that actually.
It's so funny, like the way that emotional manifestors talk about this stuff has such a different frequency to it than splenic and ego manifestors. Because not that I think splenic and ego manifestors experience a lot of pain and grief through their experimentation with their closed aura, but it's like the emotional context for them is just color.
Mm.
because it's not their authority. And for the
Mhm.
emotional manifestor, the emotional context is the truth. And so like we don't experience the closed aura and without that like deep spectrum of emotional force
Mhm.
around it, without like, you know, the other side of it is sometimes I'm like, I'm a manifestor, I'm fucking powerful, like I can do anything, you know? But then the other side of that is like, this is deeply isolating, and
Yeah.
like no one will ever touch the inside of me. No one will ever
Mm.
touch the inside
Mhm.
of me, you know? And like,
Mhm.
that's not like unilaterally true, but there's a
Mm.
truth to that, that the emotional manifestor has no choice but to
Mm.
engage with and process and like
Mhm.
collect and integrate into their experience of truth.
Yeah. Yeah. Full. Yeah.
So my first teachers were and are John and Amy of
Mhm.
Human Design Collective, but one of their primary teachers was Alakanon Diaz, who has become one of my primary teachers too, and Alak's an emotional manifestor. So it's been
Mm.
really cool to get to learn from a fellow emotional manifestor and like see what that kind of transmission and teaching looks like, because it looks
Yeah.
really different than the projector version of a teacher, which has been really helpful for me.
Mhm.
And Alak has been in human design for I think close to 3 decades and was like besties with Ra. So also
Mhm.
just like a very, it's an honor to get to learn from someone who's so deep into their experiment,
Mm.
and studied with Ra Uruhu. But I remember one thing he said in one of our lectures about manifestors was like, we're just the predator. Like we just are. We have a
Mm.
predator aura.
Mhm.
And it doesn't mean that we have predator intentions,
Mm.
but historically speaking, manifestors did.
Mm.
Historically speaking, like manifestors were often the kings and the empires of the old world that were calling the shots and um, exploiting generator energy. And so, as a society, we all have that baggage. As a
Mm.
society, generators feel the threat of the
Mhm.
manifestor aura. And
Yeah.
even taking away the societal baggage, like just looking mechanically at what's happening,
Mm.
people can't feel inside of the manifestor aura. And so
Mhm.
it's natural for a part of them to experience the feeling of being threatened,
Mhm.
because people can sense there's this big, it's not just a closed aura, it's repelling, or we could also say pushing and
Mhm.
impacting. Like
Mm.
what a manifestor will literally energetically affect everyone and everything around them to a
Mm.
level that no other type's movement
Yeah.
will.
Yeah.
And so that's where this, like, a lot helped me feel more neutral about this concept of having this predator aura, which helped me
Mm.
feel a little bit more at ease about, like, it helped me not take it personally when people
Yeah.
feel threatened by me. A lot of
Mhm.
manifestors will tell you, like, we feel like these little sensitive, gooey beings inside.
Mm.
And then we watch ourselves move through the world. And it's like, I'm also Italian and a Sag rising, and I have a really big butt. So I often think about that, like having wide hips and a big butt and just like bumping into things. That's kind of the
Mm.
manifestor experience.
Mhm.
I'm not built to respond the way you are. And I'm not built to
Mhm.
plug into other people. So it doesn't dawn on me that
Mm.
my just like innocent, oblivious movement through the world is creating such a wake
Yeah.
in my path.
Yeah.
And so when people are affected by it, and often, not always, but sometimes from a place of feeling threatened and then
Mm.
wanting to punish you for it or wanting to control you because they feel threatened, it's just like,
Mhm.
what's happening? You know, it's just like,
Mm.
why is this happening? And there's
Mhm.
that phrase, generators are here to know themselves, manifestors are here to know their impact. That's kind of the life journey, is like acknowledging the impact. But when Alok brought up that like we are the predator, and he said informing is like essentially acknowledging like, yeah, I could eat you, but don't worry, I've already had my lunch today. You know, and informing is just about putting the other person at ease and
Mm.
trying to create as best as possible the conditions where um everyone can honor their own autonomy and relax into their own nature without being afraid of what this unpredictable, impactful being next to you is going to do. And so
Mm.
that's helped me like just neutralize it a lot. Again, it's not personal, it's mechanics, but
Mhm.
a lifetime of being, you know, and again, this is going to sound dramatic, but being a fifth line manifestor, part of my process is to acknowledge the extent to which I have been punished for just being
Mm.
myself, like
Mhm.
especially as a fifth line manifestor.
Yeah.
And so a lifetime of like acknowledging the way that that's affected me was an important part of my process, but also so has been acknowledging that that's a mechanical thing, and it's not
Mm.
actually anyone's fault.
Yeah.
And I can't blame other people for bumping into the rare closed aura and being like, what is that? And having
Mm.
maybe sometimes a sense of fear associated with it.
Mhm.
When I
Mhm.
stopped blaming myself for it,
Mm.
it helped me to stop blaming other people for having that experience on the other side of my aura.
Mhm. Mhm. Would you want to talk about the fifth line projection field experience as well? I'm
Yeah.
inspired by also knowing that this conversation is probably going to air before the start of Heretic Haven, which you and Allison are creating, and I'm in it and very excited for it. But yeah, I want to hear more about that offering, but maybe specifically through the lens of the projection field. Hmm.
Yeah. Well, I'm kind of curious. I don't would you feel interested in speaking to your like current experience of
Sure.
projection? That would be a
Yeah.
helpful starting point for me because we've
Yeah.
talked around it a lot, but I'm not sure I've actually really gotten a whole lot of direct information about your current experience
Hmm.
with it as a fellow heretic.
Hmm. Yeah. This is a conversation that my friend Britton and I have been talking about a lot recently. And I know you're also connected with Britton. Um, because I don't know if it has to do with age or if it has to do with awareness. I would say that I've always been marginally aware of the projection field around me. But I think in my own lived experience, at least on a conscious level, I've been so focused on the third line, experimentation kind of like trial error process that I haven't I haven't paid a lot of attention or studied the mechanics of my projection field a whole lot, I have to say, on a conscious level. Um, what I have noticed though is for me, I feel like I have a really acute like sixth sense of almost like what people are expecting out of me. And there's almost this very subtle what I've seen throughout my life is there's a subtle maneuvering around sensing into what is being expected of me and quickly deciding if I'm going to play with the script or not.
Mm,
And I think that partially, I can thank maybe my own unconscious prodigious nature around this, where I feel like I'm really good at sensing, can I fulfill this projection or not? If I can't
mm,
fulfill this projection, I'm just going to get out of it as soon as
mm,
possible.
mm.
Right. And so part of my work recently has been um, really noticing places where I get scared around maybe expanding my work or expanding the ways that I show up publicly because I can just sense the intensity of that projection and I'm not available for it. And
Yeah.
tweaking my strategy in terms of, for example, like business strategy or how I show up on Instagram or even on my podcast to this sense of like, if this is what's going to be expected out of me, I'm going to anticipate that that's going to happen and I'm going to calibrate accordingly so that people don't expect what I can't give.
Yeah. Are
And
you
that
conscious
is,
as you're
and what I will say, the last thing I'll share is that I think that recently the piece that's been very enlightening for me is that I do that in service of my trial and error process. Because
yeah,
I found that in smoothing out the edges of the projection field, it facilitates a more easeful trial and error process, if that makes
yeah,
sense.
yeah. That's what I was going to ask is, are you conscious as you're sharing all of this, all of the third line keynoting that you're doing?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, three fives are so like y'all are such interesting characters to me because there's no denying that you experience the level of projection that I do.
Mm,
But not only is your orientation to the projection field less conscious, which doesn't
mhm,
make it any less real. It's just less forefront of mind because you're consciously motivated by the third line process versus
mhm,
I'm consciously motivated by desiring to universalize and deliver heresy and noticing the projection that comes with that, right? So it's
Mm.
a really different experience of the fifth line.
Mhm.
But not only that, because there's also the 2-5 profile, who there's 4 fifth line profiles, 5-1 and 3-5, most common, and then 5-2 and 2-5, less common because they're harmonic.
Mhm.
So 3-5s you have in common with 2-5s that there's a more personal process at the forefront, and then the projection's kind of just this thing that follows you. The projection and
Mhm.
everything else that comes with the fifth line is just
Mhm.
this thing that's always with you, but it's not the point
Mhm.
as far as your conscious mind goes, right?
Mhm.
But then the 3-5, like you all are just so, the 3 is so resilient, right? Like that's built into the 3 because the 3 is consciously motivated to find out what the fuck works, which
Mm.
means it doesn't register failure in the same way, or like bumping into things or falling down or mistakes or struggle. It doesn't register those things in the same way that any other profile line will, because the 3 understands that everything that doesn't work is
Mhm.
really valuable because it shows me something, right? And you were also like, a lot of what I thought you were keynoting too was this concept within the third line of making and breaking bonds, right?
Mm.
The
Mhm.
third line is like we talk about the trial and error. Sometimes we talk about like the kind of chaotic process of the third line. And
Mm.
this might resonate with 1-3s, 6-3s, and 3-6s as well, the other third line profiles, in addition to 3-5s. Like I kind of think about the making and breaking bonds archetype that comes with the third line of like, you'll try anything once because you
Mhm.
want to see what happens and you know you'll
Mhm.
learn from it. So
Mhm.
there's this like edge you have, this resilience and this like willingness that you have to like, oh, you're projecting this? Like this is your expectation of me? I'll try it. You
Mhm.
know, like it doesn't have to, it maybe doesn't get to you. It doesn't have to get to you
Yeah.
to such an intense depth because you're like, I'll play with it. I'll play with
Mhm.
that projection. And then you're like, it's not working. I'm done with it. Bond
Yeah.
broken. And like, that's how you're designed to operate, right?
True.
So
Mhm.
it's just, yeah, it's like the 3-5s kind of feel like the ninjas of the
Mm.
fifth line personalities to me, because you're just
Mhm.
like, projection, let's deal with it. Okay, I'm done with this one. You know, it's just like this
Yeah.
fast movement, and you can become just as aware and just as masterful, if not more masterful, because you're a fucking third line. Sorry, I'm swearing so much. You can become just as masterful of the projection field, but it doesn't have to get to you. Like you're literally
Mhm.
not identifying
Yeah.
with the projection so much. So it's just such a magical profile to me. And I think probably after that, I would say is the 2-5.
Mm.
Anytime you have a 1 or a 2 in your profile line, you're dealing with splenic binary,
Mhm.
which essentially just means you're dealing with themes of like safety and security and well-being. You're trying to hold on to life. So there's a natural kind of insecurity or vulnerability that appears when you have
Mm.
a 1 or a 2. So
Mhm.
2-5s, similar to you, the fifth line stuff might be happening in little more subtle ways because the second line personality is very wrapped up in their own experience. It looks
Mhm.
different than the 3, and it's less resilient and more
Mhm.
vulnerable than the 3,
Mhm.
but it's still in its own process. But it, so I, when I like think about I've started to kind of process in terms of how do these 4 different, some of this is looking ahead at Heretic Haven and thinking about some of the discussions we might be having.
Mhm.
But like I've started to arrange the fifth line profiles as like 3-5s, friggin' resilient ninjas in the projection field. 2-5s, a little bit less resilient, but a little bit aloof. You know,
Mm. Mhm.
5-2s, we have the same aloofness of the second line, but we're more consciously aware of like everything that's happening in the projection field. And then five
Mhm.
ones, whew, man,
Yeah.
like that first line unconscious need for security,
Mm.
that constant quest to feel more secure, to have a more solid foundation,
Mhm.
being steamrolled by
Mhm.
the experience of conscious projection. So
Yeah.
yeah, it was kind of cool to hear you riff a bit on your experience and hear how strong the 3 themes are, and like hear
Mhm.
how, you know, you and I, as I mentioned earlier, we resonate so strongly on fifth line stuff,
Mhm.
which is beyond just projection, but that's a big part of it. But our experience of it is so differentiated. It was cool to hear that come alive.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and I mean, to speak to universalize about projection, like this is so connected to other stuff we talked about today, like the Maia and the mind. To me, the mind and the Maia are one and the same. And the Aries Libra nodes and relationship and obligation and shame and blame, like all of these things are connected. What being aware of fifth line projection has offered me is like this more fine-tuned awareness of the universality of projection in general, because we are all always projecting onto one another, because regardless of your profile line, regardless of your design, you can only experience things from the center of your own solar system. This is kind of like a Leo lesson for me, right? Like each of us is the sun in our own unique constellation. And no matter how, again, aware and awake we are, no matter how empathetic we become, we can conceptualize another person's experience, and we can become energetically and psychically attuned, and different designs will point to different ways that we are energetically and psychically attuned to other people. But ultimately, at the root, we can never truly experience in this moment of time space the subjective reality of another being. And so every time we try to process intellectually another person's experience, their intention, anything about them, it's always getting filtered through our unique solar center. And so projection is not this like gross, nasty, bad thing. It's just a mechanical component of reality that we're always projecting, because we can only experience things from our own subjective core. And then as you learn about the profile archetypes, the 6 profile lines, and that process and that archetype and the role of what the 5 is here to do, we're all kind of magicians. I mean, everyone is a magician in their own way, but the 5's magic specifically is like taking on the mechanical, there's a word that I'm struggling to find, the mechanical non-negotiable, I guess, works of projection. The 5 is like, let me wear that and let me work within that. Because what the 5 is here to do, if you think about the 6 lines as this process, 1, 2, and 3, you're learning something for yourself. 4, 5, and 6, you're now finding a way to frame that and message that and influence others with what you learned. The 4 does that in a foundational way, in this kind of like horizontal networking way. The 5 goes a step above that and is like, I'm kind of over personalizing the message. So I'm going to, and it's not even a conscious thing we do, it's just what we do as 5s. We're like constantly circling for a bigger truth, a truth that applies not just to you, but the truth that applies to everyone and everything. And so we organically, naturally find the ways to phrase and word and conceptualize truth that it can hit more people. It doesn't have to be personalized. And we do that with language. We do that with words. We do that with a performance of some kind. Versus the 6 then, whose archetype is the role model, I kind of like to say 5th lines talk the talk, 6 lines walk the walk, which doesn't mean we can't also walk the truth as 5th lines. It's just we're oriented towards the message, whereas the 6th lines are, everything 6 in human design, 6 lines, 6 color, 6 tone is all about embodiment. So the 6th line is like embodying their differentiated truth, where the 5th line is spreading the word in these powerful, potent heresies about truth. And when you're able to access truth, like distilled truth in that way, the way that 5th lines do, like that's our gift, it's going to attract projection, because when people hear your truth and resonate with it, they see something true about themselves. And it just like triggers it just triggers projection, I guess, because it's like suddenly they're so locked in to their truth. And part of the reason they can hear truth through the 5th line the way they can't through anyone else, that's part of the reason that we inspire and like energetically like summon truth through our 5th line-ness, is because of projection, because people are able to look at us and see and hear whatever they need to see and hear in order to receive that message. And so it's another way, kind of like I talk about the sacrifice of my closed aura, there's something about that feels really true for the 5th line as well, where it's like, I'll play the role of your hero, I'll play the role of your villain, I'll play the role of this like caricature that you're making out of me, wherever it falls on the good bad spectrum. And I have no choice but to play that, because it's just mechanically what happens. And there's a feeling of disempowerment that can come along with that, and I've moved through it many times. There's a lot of like no one will ever see me
Mm.
stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also like, but this is who I am. I
Mm-hmm.
am the heretic. I am the
Yeah.
universalizer. I want to be able to deliver this message. And so I accept it. I accept
Right.
everything that comes with it. And
Yeah.
and I guess I do want to say, we're speaking specifically to fifth lines, but like everybody deals with projection. It's just that
Mm.
it's crucial for the fifth line
Yeah.
to have an awareness of it, because in a very big way, we're here to master, and we're
Mm-hmm.
here to master the projection field and utilize it
Mm-hmm.
in a
Mm-hmm.
way, right?
Yeah.
And everybody will experience the pain of projection both ways. Like
Mm-hmm.
others not being who we thought we were, who we wanted them to be, who we expected them to be, and
Mm.
us also not being that for other people. Like that's a universal human thing,
Yeah.
but it's just such a loud texture within the
Mm.
experience of those of us with fifth line profiles that like it's can be an extremely valuable awareness to have in
Mm-hmm.
your toolkit as you're moving through the world behind the fog, like the heavy fog of the projection field.
Totally, totally. And I think something that I see a lot too with, you know, my fifth line friends in various guises is it can be easy to default into thinking, and I think it's totally warranted, right? Especially when that grief is present, to think that, oh, other people just can't see me. But actually, in my experience, there's a way in which when I'm in that space, I'm also not seeing other people. Like
Mm-hmm.
there's a there's a filter of projection that's happening that prevents some sort of connection to happen. And connection can look many different ways, but yeah, I think as a 3-5, something that I found helpful is really taking responsibility for my own part in
Mm-hmm.
playing around with that
Totally.
projection field as well.
Yeah,
Because I
totally.
definitely do that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is a huge, huge piece of it.
Hmm.
This like spiral of and that's what Heretic Haven is largely inspired by, is like, and Allison and I are both emotional, so our process with this fifth line stuff is very much required, like over and over spiraling through the sad, grief,
Mm.
heavy parts of it
Hmm.
and coming back up into a place of empowerment and
Mm.
energizedness about it.
Hmm.
Um, but it's like the concept haven, the heretic haven, like a closed space for fifth lines to just explore and process this experience of this particular level of projection, is like no one can really understand the gravity of it like another fifth line. And
Mm.
so there's so much like we have to get to the point where we're taking responsibility for it. We have to, otherwise
Hmm.
life is miserable.
Yeah.
We don't want to feel victim forever, but we also have to honor the parts of it that hurt and are
Yeah.
lonely and are confusing and disorienting. And I do have a handful of friends who are like, who speak human design and are in their experiments, who aren't fifth lines, who
Mm.
bring this like tangible, I always call it curiosity and humility to the
Mm.
table when it comes to the fifth line, where
Hmm.
I can tell that they want to be careful and
Mm.
they want to be aware. And there's this humility in their like ability to acknowledge that what they think they know about me is not probably
Hmm.
as true as they
Hmm.
think. And then there's this
Hmm.
curious open-mindedness, and like I feel safe with those people, and I feel like they care about my experience of fifth line projection. They want to know about it because the fifth line is so mysterious. So
Hmm.
again, that curiosity and that humility keeps them in a place of like openness to
Mm.
seeing the complexity of me beyond what it looks like through the
Hmm.
projection. So I
Hmm.
don't mean to over generalize and say that only fifth lines are the only people that can like be there for you as you process
Hmm.
this stuff, because
Yeah.
I do have a lot of like all profile type friends who they have some knack for, I don't want to say seeing through the projection field, but they have again the humility and the curiosity needed to approach it. Um, in a healthy way,
Yeah.
in an open-minded way. But that being said, a lot of my most powerful moments of like understanding projection and forgiving myself and others for the messiness and the rupture that can happen through the projection field has come through talking directly with other fifth lines about it, because
Mm.
having the space to actually be sad about it and be
Yeah.
angry about
Mm-hmm.
it and be
Mm-hmm.
messy about it
Mm-hmm.
is really
Mm-hmm.
important, because a lot of times fifth lines, we develop like these perfectionism complexes because we're afraid of getting punished. And
Mm-hmm.
that's like one of the, third lines were like making and breaking bonds, anarchy energy, the things that go with that for fifth lines, like our versions of those, um, like archetypes are like getting burned at the stake, like getting
Mm-hmm.
punished, getting
Mm-hmm.
like pushed off a pedestal, getting canceled,
Mm.
and so there's like, it's scary. It's scary to let your humanity and your vulnerability be shown as a fifth line sometimes, because we truly are vulnerable. We're like truly very vulnerable to
Yeah.
those things. And so having a space where other people, um, from personal experience, have like seen the fucking power that projection can have over one's sense of reality,
Mm-hmm.
and the power that someone else's projection and sense of reality can have over your own sense of clarity and well-being.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's just, yeah, I feel very blessed to have had some close fifth line friends in my early days of experimentation, and look forward to being able to offer
Mm-hmm.
the resource of fifth line connection to process through it for folks who are where I'm at or maybe a little earlier on their journey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm excited for it. Do you want to talk a little bit more about the logistics of Heretic Haven, Kelsey, as well as other offerings and ways that people can work with you?
Yeah, so for Heretic Haven, just check out heretic-haven.com. There's like so much info that I feel like it'd be better for people to just peruse it on their own than for me to try to sum it up.
Yeah.
But the very basics are it's 3 months, and it's a mixture of kind of like transmissions. There's a monthly more transmission type of call, and then each month there's also 2 more connective participatory calls, some full group, some small group. So like there will be a time when Jonathan meets with all the 3 5s, and a time when Jonathan meets with the generators. So some different levels of connection and intimacy. And then there's also a ongoing private IG community space. So
Mm.
those are like the structural logistics, and the website has a lot more info about exactly what it is we're going to be moving through, content and frequency wise,
Mm-hmm.
awareness wise.
Yeah.
I feel like, so have you talked about human design on your podcast before, Jonathan?
No, this is the first time.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
cool. It'll be an interesting intro for some people, maybe, because we didn't really like take any kind of foundational linear approach.
Yeah.
Um,
I
but
feel
if
like
people,
also I feel like also most people probably have a tangential awareness of it.
at this
Mm-hmm.
point,
Mm-hmm.
cool. Yeah, well, if people are interested in a more like foundational curricular approach to human design, I have I have 3 ways that I teach human design right now. One of them is like I sporadically actually offer the in-depth LYD, Living Your Design course,
Mm-hmm.
which I feel like I will do at some point in 2024, but I don't know when. I'm going to have
Mm-hmm.
a wait list on my website so people can add themselves to that. But I do have 2 lesser involved ways to become introduced to the mechanics of human design through my particular frequency and transmission. And they're both on my website at kelseyrosetort.com/learn human design. One is a single, but I think it's like almost 3 hours long workshop called What the Fuck is My Aura Type? The subtitle is Clarification for the Curious and the Confused on the Basic Concepts of Type Strategy and Signature Not Self Themes in Human Design. So
Mm-hmm.
it covers like the basics of the body graph, so you know what you're actually looking at. And earlier I had mentioned like type, strategy, and authority are really all you need, but having that layer of center mechanics can help all that stuff land
Mm.
so much more clearly. So that's what that workshop goes through. It just orients like very basically to the centers and then connects that to type, strategy, and authority. And then I also have the course that you mentioned, Fundamentals of Human Design for the Astrologically Minded, which is multi-part. I think in total it's 7 hours. I'm so
Mm-hmm.
thorough when I teach.
Mm-hmm.
But it actually goes through all the types a bit more in depth, each of the 9 centers in depth, all the strategies, all the different authorities, which is the same content that's in LYD, but it's just a faster, not interactive version.
Mm-hmm.
So those are good places to start. And they're like the input pricing wise and energetic timing wise is very different. So depending on how much people want to dip in their toes, those are both on my site. And then either of those would also be good kind of precursors to potentially doing the longer live version of LYD with me later if people are interested. And then I teach astrology too. So I have astrology workshops and a course on my site. And I have a podcast called The Maia Games, which Jonathan was recently on with our friend Sabrina doing a spring 2024 forecast. And then the only way I'm really like engaging live with people besides the upcoming Heretic Haven right now is through my weekly Astro Church sessions, which are basically just like a weekly kind of sort of forecast, sort of just like it's church, you know, it's a spiritual tone setting for the week. And that happens live on Sunday mornings, but it also is delivered via Patreon for people who don't want to or can't make it live. And that's open for people to join the congregation rolling basis. It's going to be happening through June of this year. So that's what I've got happening.
Beautiful. As we close out, Kelsey, is there anything else that I didn't ask that you want to talk about or that I should have asked?
I don't think so. No, we hit all sorts of points. Good luck naming and describing this episode.
I was thinking about that. I think it's going to be great, though. I'm thinking the Maia and human design.
I like it. Yeah. I feel like this conversation felt like it definitely captured the kind of frenetic energy of the moment that we're in with the recent Mercury station and being in the middle of eclipses, but like not always directly naming, but really feeling into that Aries Libra polarity through our conversations around design and relationship.
Totally. Well,
thank you for having me.
Thank you, Kelsey. This is so incredible. I appreciate your work and all the beautiful things you put out there.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for listening.
Thank you.